何俊仁議員。
Mr. Overhaul, President. It is the 67th day since the Occupy movement started. The Occupy trio has surrendered themselves to the police and urged people to leave the street. But many who stay in Admiralty said that they don't have any intention of leaving. And this is the situation we find ourselves in today. This umbrella movement has taken the world by storm, and it all started for well-known reasons. On the 31st of August, the NPCSC took the decision to retract the timetable for universal suffrage in 2017 and 2020. They reneged on their words. The younger generation feels that there is not that much in the way of a future. And for the sake of democracy, they resorted to civil disobedience and staged a protest. The Hong Kong government is mired in a governance crisis which has never been seen before. The SAR government never sincerely tried to resolve this crisis in a determined manner. The government has lost the credibility. The government has lost its confidence. The police are supposed to be neutral and professional and act in accordance with the law. Now it seems that the police have lost this very ability. They are relying on the members of the public who sought injunctions from the court to protect their personal properties. And I think that this is wholly absurd. To use court injunction to deal with this mass movement is an indication of the cowardice on the part of the police. And the police are merely assisting in the court bailiff to clear out the sites. And they are not invoking the laws passed by the Legislative Council, like the Public Order Ordinance, the Crimes Ordinance, and a whole host of other ordinances that empower them to enforce the law in a fair manner. And one can't help doubting why the police have degenerated to this kind of level. President, the reliance on the civil action to protect the personal property is not unseen. In the 1980s, Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher faced waves and waves of protests, and she found herself really helpless. And it was the power companies that sought court injunctions and asked the police to assist in enforcing the injunctions. But history tells us that the UK government, through the Home Secretary, said in the Parliament that the police could not actually enforce the law. There was one instance in which the power company turned up in court in the morning and applied for an injunction to detain the union leader for contempt of court, and he was taken to the court for hearing. In the afternoon, the Home Secretary applied to the court for a withdrawal of the injunction because that would have triggered a nationwide strike, and the situation could get out of hand. The UK government resorted to negotiation. Basically, to resolve the problem. And the mining strike really paralyzed the entire of the UK. Why is it that the government is not living up to its responsibilities? It is incumbent upon the government to take the lead and resolve this political crisis. And they simply cannot rely on the police to indirectly assist in the court bailiff's execution of the court injunction to resolve this difficult political problem. President, to many protesters, however the government tries to clear the sites through the police or through the court bailiffs, we know full well that there will come a day when the occupation will be brought to an end. And this is something predictable. If the police enforce the law of its own accord, I'm sure that the protesters in Causeway Bay, Mong Kok, and Admiralty will be abiding by the principle of peace and being sensible and leave of their own accord. There are some who surrendered themselves to the police. There are many, myself included, who are prepared to stay on the scene and urge people to abide by the peaceful and rational principle when the police come and clear out the site, and they should be prepared for the prospect of detention, prosecution, and imprisonment. And this is the spirit that we should be holding fast to from the beginning to the end. The government has been letting the situation drag on, and as a result, in the protest zones, the protesters are very emotionally tense, and there were radicals who stormed the electrical building, and they broke the window glass pane of the electrical building, and this is not something that we can accept, and we condemn this kind of act. A couple of days ago, the students couldn't hold themselves anymore, and they tried to encircle the central government offices, and that caused really some arrest. Now, we do have reservations about the escalation of their action, but they said that they would stick to the peaceful principle. I mean, things can get out of hand on the scene. In Mong Kok, the protest zones have been cleared out. What's the situation like? People are going shopping in the form of they are taking a mobile protest in the form of shopping. And the shops along Nathan Road and Argyle Street are adversely affected. And the impact is really extending to Yau Ma Tei, Tsim Sha Tsui, and Mong Kok. So, President, can we bury our head in the sand and think that by clearing out the site, that will be the end of the matter? President, this lingering situation has caused the confrontation between the protesters and the police in clashes, and sometimes they come to blows. I must admit that the occupiers or the protesters, some of them are really emotional, and they are reacting emotionally to the police action. They may be provoking the police, and all these acts we don't really condone. But this is something that is happening. A lot of, the majority of the protesters and occupiers are firmly abiding by the principle of being peaceful and rational. What is saddening is that the police are forced to become the tool to suppress the protests, and these people do have their lofty ideals, and the situation is politically tense. Given the long-term stress, and there was a situation where the police were losing control themselves. Now, it is true that the police did exercise a certain amount of self-restraint. They could not use any strong weapons like the plastic bullets or high-grade weapons that they would cause bloodshed. But the policemen on the scene, as I said, they were put under stressful, intense situation for a long time, and they were suffering from these verbal abuse, and some of them were provoking the crowd, and when there were physical clashes, a confrontation will ensue. And some of the policemen used unnecessary force. I don't have to be verbose about it. On TV, we saw one of the superintendents who was about to proceed to retirement. And there was this guy who was leaving. He was walking away from the scene. And he took a battering of the baton by this superintendent. I know that he is proceeding to retirement. If he is subject to any sanction, I feel sad for him. Now, he is a superintendent. He has a wealth of experience behind him, and he's a senior member of the force, and he's losing control himself. You can imagine how bad the situation is for the frontline policemen. We saw what happened in the dark corner, and we saw what happened on TV. There were 7 policemen who were roughing up a protester who was restrained. Now, all these episodes are indisputable, but this is only the tip of the iceberg, unfortunately. The police have been held in high esteem for being professional, for being a fine, disciplined force, and they are really hanging their head in shame now. President, we are dealing with a political decision. There is some Chi-wai and some other people who have to be held responsible. Secretary, you are the principal official. You have to be held to it. Have the police been given good enough psychological counseling? Have there been good enough deployment? I think we have to be fair. The policemen themselves are really the victims of this political blunder. Now, there are so many protesters who are victims, of course, but the policemen themselves are the victims also. President Mr. Mong Kok asked me to respond, and I think from what he said, he doesn't have an idea about civil disobedience. He thought that by breaching the law, it is an act of civil disobedience. In the Kwun Chung case, the judge cited a number of literature about civil disobedience, which is very profound and very meaningful. And he said that this is a respectable ideal, but he said that civil disobedience cannot be an excuse for clemency. That much I agree. The most important thing is today we have to abide by the spirit of being peaceful and sensible. And we have to understand our objective of seeking democracy. Otherwise, we are not sure about our future.
Mr. Chan Chi-wai, I want to have a quorum called in accordance with 17(2).
John Hak-kan, you.
Mr. Chan, Hak-kan. President, well, I didn't want to speak in the first place because for this topic, whether we're talking about our council meeting, our House committee meetings, or our security panel meetings, it has been brought up for discussion for many, many times. But as I said and listened to the pandemocrats speaking, I wouldn't say they are trying to twist the fact, but they are being partial. They listen partially, or they're being selective about what is true. Dr. Kwok said some protesters were beaten until they fainted, and then it said that some policemen use abusive language. But have you noticed that there was a case in which a policeman was also beaten up and fainted? And have you heard policemen being abused verbally by protesters? We have done that. Why didn't the pandemocrats tell us about that? I know Dr. Kenneth Chan is a devout Catholic, and many the pandemocrats here are Christians, whether Protestants or Catholics. I'm not a Christian, but I've known this Bible teaching. When you cast the first stone, you have to ask yourself whether you are also a sinner or not. When Dr. Kenneth Chan used the most righteous tone to ask Mr. Chi-wai to be a man of commitment, now today the Occupy Central Trio have turned themselves in. Why Dr. Chan and other pandemocrats also turned themselves in as committed people today? Only Mr. Wu Chi-wai has shown any commitment, and unfortunately, he's not with us today. I think in moving this motion, the pandemocrats are trying to point fingers at others. The police were there to assist the bailiffs in executing the court junctions. The judge made it very clear that it was about clearing of the obstacles and barricades. We heard this on the TV news report. But what did the protesters do when the bailiffs and police were there to clear away the barricades? And what happens in the following Saturday, then in the following evening? What did the protesters do? Professor Benny Tai said everyone had to be responsible for one's own act. There were people throwing objects at the police, and the police found self-made weapons from the protesters. And we talk when the pandemocrats talk about police violence using batons on protesters. Do you know that in the shoes used by the protesters there were nails? Have you seen those violent act? Or are you trying just being selective in telling us what has happened? The police officers have been risking their own safety in carrying out the duties, and the police did tell the protesters to disperse. Red flag was hoisted to warn them. When the police officers were there to do their job and they ask you to go away and you do not listen, and then you put up a resistance, and then you accuse the police of doing their job. well, then you have it all. You are always right. I suspect the Pan-Democrats in this council did not go to the sites recently because they are out of tune with the development. If you listen to the views of our people, you know that most people are against the occupation. 2 days ago, I went to dine in a small restaurant. When the TV showed the clashes between the protesters and the police, and many customers there criticized not the police, but the violent protesters. President, from this, you know how people have reacted to this. And the opinion poll findings also send a clear message to the Pan-Democrats as regards where our people stand. I would advise the Pan-Democrats against resorting to biased arguments to give themselves fake courage, because if the protesters continue like this, they are bound to lose people's support. And even Mr. Ronnie Tong has pointed out that this will be the case. And of course, there may be chaos when the police discharge their duties, or the journalists' work may be inconvenience. But I just don't see any case of press freedom being adversely affected. If the Pan-Democrats want to smear the police by invoking press freedom, I would say this is really shameless. Some members said a moment ago that these protesters are amateurs. If they are amateur troublemakers, why is it that the Pan-Democrats want to protect them? Why to defend them? Why are you praising them? Do you want them to continue with the occupation? Do you want to give them moral support? Or do you really want them to leave the occupation sites? I'm at a loss as to what the Pan-Democrats are trying to achieve. Mr. Deputy, the illegal occupation of our roads is something that our people are mostly tired of. If there were no one who'd organize this, if the Pan-Democrats didn't take the lead, we wouldn't be in the situation we are now in. Here, I would like to show my respect to the police officers who have been there all the time for us, who have been discharging their duties faithfully. When the Pan-Democrats want to invoke the Bible in criticizing our police, please, you have to reflect upon what you have done and whether you have done something wrong.
Yeah.
Dr. Priscilla Leung, Mr. Che-cheung, I'd like to have a quorum count.
梁美芬議員。
Dr. Priscilla Leung. Mr. Deputy, I very much hope that after today, the pan-democrats will no longer spend their emotions on police officers. Hong Kong is sick. We really need doctors, but we don't just need doctors who only know how to scold police officers. We need doctors who are willing to treat this very divisive Hong Kong. Mr. Deputy, many people ask why this political controversy has turned the police officers into the crux of this matter. Well, Mr. Gary Fan also mentioned that. Well, the NPCSC decision on the 31st of August was in controversy. There was this report last year that an Occupy Central movement was to be started to paralyze the arteries of Hong Kong as well as the police force. There are only 28,000 police officers in the police force, and only 10,000 people would be able to paralyze the force. The initiators of the Occupy Central movement started with the intention of damaging Hong Kong, damaging the business of Hong Kong, damaging the livelihood of Hong Kong, and they've often treated paralyzing the police force as their objective. So bad-mouthing, smearing, etc., emerged. And Mr. Benny Tai wrote an article on police force. He also instigated police officers to be incooperative. He would like the police officers to fall into his trap. He said that 4 officers would be there to carry 1 citizen. And Wan Chai was mentioned. The scene depicted was terrific. Love and peace would definitely be turned into hatred and hostility. That was actually predestined. I argued with him. I mentioned the June 4th incident. On many occasions, I told him very sincerely that there would only be damage and destruction and no construction, which would only hurt Hong Kong's young persons, Hong Kong society, and Hong Kong's constitutional reform, which would regress for 5 to 10 years. They didn't want to accept my words. I'm not a person who has a crystal ball, but I know how to gain more room for development for Hong Kong. Unfortunately, they turned a deaf ear on my advice. Recently, when Benny Tai was interviewed, he said that at the beginning, he only wanted to occupy Central. He set fire on the forest, but he said that he would only like to burn down 1 tree, not the whole forest. He repeatedly said that he wouldn't want young persons and secondary students to join the movement. But eventually, the movement is now on the shoulders of young persons and students. And Joshua Wong said that he's bearing 5 offenses. I was saddened on hearing that. All these incidents are really saddening. Members of the public are angry. They surrender themselves, but that cannot mend a divided Hong Kong. Hong Kong's today is the result of the hard work of many, many generations. Our freedom, rule of law, etc. are not built in one day. However, the hearts of our young people are covered. They don't see the hard work of the former generations. They only see what they don't get now. From TV, I saw this girl said that we will not be able to face our next generations. I really have to say something on hearing that. You really have to say something before you can be held accountable to your ancestors and your younger generations. Some businessmen are already saying that they won't hire our university students. It's because a number of radical students have been leading this movement, and many young people have followed them. They are now perplexed. The Hong Kong's university students. How do we view this generation of university students? Many Hong Kong people are saying that in the past we said that young persons are really formidable, but now they're terrible. Some people told me that they would be excised, so to speak, if they didn't report once or twice to the movement. And then some went back to school, and the S4 students told them why they should be at school. Those who are at school now would be named study slaves. Why can't our students choose to study? This generation is really pitiful. Some have joined the Occupy movement. They are definitely very perplexed now because they know the movement is not going anywhere. There are not to be any results, and many Hong Kong people hate them now. So they're no longer heroes. And when they walk on the streets, when they meet ordinary citizens who shop, etc., or go to the market, scold them for damaging law and order. But then there are these silent young persons who have remained silent. They didn't dare go out because they might be scolded and they're afraid of being excluded. They are very much depressed. They're also divided. Hong Kong is facing a most saddening time. In a boutique in Central, which I patronize very frequently, business was very dim. I was told that in Causeway Bay, the son bought something back, and that's from the Occupy Central movement. So that person asked his son back for the money. So the sentiments between the mother and the son was damaged. And there was this couple who was very happy that their child enter the Hong Kong University. But eventually they refused to attend the graduation ceremony because the graduation ceremonies have become something that we no longer know. And then somebody cried in front of me. He went home very late and then saw on his clothes 2 Chinese characters, which mean black police. He was very sad. Although police officers used to be very strong, he cried out. He asked the son to leave immediately. He didn't want to see anything happen between him and the son. He wanted them to cool down before they say anything. He trusted me, so he told me the story. I fully understand the passion of young people. I even joined such movements in the past. Every time I saw the umbrellas, I felt very sad. Why is it that again young people are pushed to the front line? On many occasions, I said that the starters of the movement are doing arson, but this fire is just like a fire on the hillside. It won't stop. The Beijing movement started from the 15th of April, and the theme was anti-corruption. Many young people went out without really understanding what politics was about. At the very senior level of the government, there was very, very strong political struggle. At the end, young people went onto the front line. All moderate advocates were scolded. I had been a moderate advocate as well. In confusion, no voices could be heard. I was at the scene. Some people even instigated the students to model on the French Commune. So many students insisted to stay on. Nobody said that one generation would be sacrificed. Many people could no longer return to China. Members, when you instigated young persons to join such dangerous movements, please think twice. That passion shouldn't be abused. In particular, yesterday, the costume shop was disturbed by the young people. But the young people were very happy because the shopkeeper said something that was not pleasing to their ears. Where has Hong Kong's civilized society and rule of law gone? Do we only know political struggle? China has experienced a lot. Struggle, offenses, revolution, etc. China could not have all these. China has always been progressive. Yes, this is a historical burden. It's just like the shell of a tortoise. We need a great deal of science and technology or indirect methods to lighten the shell. If you act hastily and take away the shell, such that the tortoise will crawl quicker, the tortoise will actually stop or no longer being able to move. We experienced a lot. We don't want to succumb to our destiny, but is civil disobedience the only outlet? Is there a third alternative? China's position is very complicated. An elder said that we don't understand Chinese politics. Given our past history, if we use disobedience, which will result in riots, well, I have to say that the Cultural Revolution actually started like this. You don't reach your destiny if you act hastily. China has come a long way before it comes to today's position. We should learn lessons from our past history. The tragedy then is still deep in our heart. Same for me. We should conduct a review. This crowd movement has gone beyond control and ended up in failure. We would like to model on the Americans. We would like to reach our destiny very quickly. So we blindly move on, resulting in a lot of people being injured. We would like to go beyond the colors. I hope that those who started the movement are courageous enough to admit this. That is, the movement has negative effects, and we should treat our police force fairly and justly. Our police officers are under huge pressure. Some of them may have gone beyond control and acted wrongly, but all along they only heard our scoldings. Still, we need a competent police force to protect us, our rule of law, such that Hong Kong is a safe place. We have the rule of law and freedom, but these may soon be damaged also. We work hard to strive for democracy. I hope we can reach consensus on this. The democracy that we want is not mock democracy. We want high-quality democracy. But what we are doing is to gain democracy that is feared by all. So ask, what sort of democracy would you like to give Hong Kong people? For those people who don't trust you, don't agree with you, you have to convince them. You have to have more courage and more broad-minded as well, so that we can have a better Hong Kong. Thank you.
Mr. Leung Chi-cheung, President. 500 or so citizens turned up at the police headquarters in support of the just enforcement of the law by the police. I feel delighted to see what happened. There are still quite a lot of people who are unhappy with this so-called umbrella movement, and they urge the police to take enforcement action in accordance with the law, so that we can get on with our life. By a stroke of coincidence, the occupied trio submitted themselves to the police, and this signified the complete failure of this Occupy movement. And it shows that this umbrella revolution is fast coming to an end. I think at this juncture, it is only right for us to discuss the police enforcement and the situation, and this is an important moment. Hong Kong relies for its success on the rule of law, and we treat the police with awe, and we regard the police as the law enforcer. And when there are problems, people would approach the police. But in this umbrella revolution, the police have been put in a confrontational position. The occupier, the umbrella movement instigators use the police as the target for attack, and they view the police enforcement of the law as an indication of police brutality, and they are instigating more people to turn against the police. And this is one of the tactics that they use in this revolution. So in enforcing the law, the police are facing tremendous problems, tremendous difficulties, and this is where the difficulties lie in this whole event. Sometimes the police are finding themselves in a helpless situation simply because of these tactics that they use. And the police are unable to resort to higher level of force to stop these people. And this is a situation of anarchy, and they are the people who are enforcing the law. Nobody can gain access to the roads unless with their permission. I think it is not dissimilar to a war situation. If the government is not determined in enforcing the law, then the situation would be getting even worse. On the night of the 30th, the battle that occurred on Long Wall Road, I think I have to say something about the modern technology. The media have their own footages, and there are also some other people who recorded what happened with their video devices, and they captured on their devices all these confrontations that happened on the scene. Now, some of the reports may not be truthful, However, there are reports that will enable us to understand the situation. In this pitched battle on Long Wall Road, there were some illegal protesters who are kitted with their gear. They're kitted out with their gear, and some of the gear would be better than the police's. And they are moving forward with the muse barriers. Now, the police are outnumbered by the protesters. Like some pro-democracy members said, if the police didn't resort to any force, then I'm sure that a lot of the policemen would have been wounded in a bad way. The police have been professional. They exercised self-restraint, and they're using limited force. And I think we can say that the police force has been acting in a good manner. Some of the policemen beat back the protesters with the batons. And from the TV footages, we saw that the policemen were beating at the shields that they used. Now, the shields are embedded with iron boards and nails. And this is no ordinary kind of charging. And the charging in a violent manner, but the police exercised self-restraint. They didn't beat the protesters on the heads. They were beating at the shields. And the protesters mounted wave and wave of charging. We saw what happened, and we fully appreciate the professional behavior of the police. So 500 members of the public turned up in support of the police action today, and I think we should support the members of the public's move to express their endorsement of the police. There are some lawyer councillors. On the 25th of November, when the injunction was handed down for Mong Kok, said that we have to observe the coverage of the injunction, otherwise the police action will be suspect. Now, these lawyers are professional themselves. The court has handed down the injunction and also all the guidelines. There were lawyers and the members of the public who were monitoring the situation. In theory, the occupiers should vacate the sites and hand the streets back to the community. But there are all these people who are interfering with the law enforcement action. I think it's only natural that the police stepped in. When the police stepped in, the pan-democrats and the lawyers came out and said that this wasn't appropriate, and they were trying to interfere with the entire clear-out operation. And they said that the police have resorted to excessive force. And they claimed that the police wounded some of the journalists by mistake, and it was interpreted as an interference with the freedom of the press. However, the police have been professional enough. They have been exercising self-restraint and took back the Mong Kok area that has been under siege for so long. But there are so many troublemakers who are harassing the traders, like one of the colleagues said that some turned up pretending to be shopping, and they were blocking the shops, stopping people going in to do their own shopping. Now, this kind of behavior is no different from the rioters. I hope that the police would enforce the law scrupulously. This kind of behavior is in breach of the law, and the government has to take this seriously and instigate proceedings against them. There are some illegal occupiers who are trying to spread the movement all over Hong Kong, but in Yuen Long, the local people reprimanded them and shouted "boo" at them. They turned up in Yau Ma Tei, Sai Kung, Ap Lei Chow, and they were greeted with disapproval from the local people. They were reprimanded by the local community, that they claimed that the movement is characterized by peace and love. This umbrella revolution is peaceful and loving, but people are really indignant about what happened, and they resent their presence. They resent the trouble that they created. So this idea of spreading the movement all over Hong Kong, and this idea of intensifying the umbrella revolution is really doomed. The Occupy trio submitted themselves to the police today, and the entire movement is going to fail gradually. For those who are there on the streets, I urge them to leave the streets as soon as possible, so that the members of the public can get back on with their own life, so that Hong Kong can continue with its prosperity going forward. For Hong Kong to be prosperous and stable, we have no alternative but to get on with the consultation on the constitutional reform. Without any legitimate and sensible electoral arrangement, Hong Kong's development will be impeded. So I urge the Pan-Democrats to support the new round of consultation on constitutional reform, so that we can take steps forward. We are going to have a reconciliation in Hong Kong. Thank you.
Mr. Lee, the illegal occupation movement has lasted for over 2 months and has dealt a severe blow to Hong Kong, the harmony, the credibility of Hong Kong government, the rule of law, and effective governance have been subject to unprecedented impacts. Mong Kok is a place where we have a lot of grassrooters. There are many different, many types of traders. We know that in Mong Kok, traders are facing a lot of pressure because of high rental. A small shop may ask for $500,000, a bigger one, $2 million. Since the start of the occupation, some traders have claimed that their turnover has been reduced by 30 to 50%, and some traders have to close their business and suffer heavy losses. And the residents have no good sleep. Their emotional well-being has been seriously disrupted. Every day they have to spend another 30 minutes or an additional hours to commute to work. There are so many cases of their life being disrupted. Some residents have complained that he lives in Tai Kok Tsui and has to go to Tai Po to work, and every day he has to spend additionally 30 minutes because of the occupation. And some friends have sent me a message that from Wan Chai to North Point, they have to spend 1.5 hours. They are very angry, although they are not just unhappy about the occupation, but they are also very angry at the police inaction for such a long time. because it's been 2 months since the start of the movement, and people's voices are so clear, and they wonder why the police haven't taken any action to restore law and order on our roads. Some may say that this is not just a big loss; it just needs a little bit of time. But for those working in the transport sector, they have suffered very high losses. Major trunk roads in the Central and Causeway Bay have been blocked. According to the sector, they have suffered a loss of $2 billion, and taxi drivers and van operators have suffered also losses. Some taxi drivers claim that their business turnover has been reduced by 30 to 50% as well. They asked the protesters to go away. They won't. They want to clear the barricades, but the police wouldn't allow them. And they asked the police to do something, and the police said it's not the right time. And they applied for injunction orders, but the road continued to be blocked, and they cannot use the road. So naturally, the police would have to offer assistance to execute the injunction orders. I think it's the expectation of the general public that the police would do something to restore order and clear away the obstacles. In a poll, 83% of those polled asked for the end of the movement. So the voices are so clear. Some members claim that such poll findings are inflated. I hope that these members will go to the districts and listen to the public. The police would like the public would like the police to take quick action and restore law and order and return the roads to them. So they very much support the police assistance in administering the injunction orders, and that they will also warn police to restore order quickly. President, many members who have spoken try to demonize the law enforcement by the police. They accuse the police as being the license or the hooligans with authority. But this is just way exaggerated. If you just listen clearly, you will know that they have suffered so much humiliation and the difficulties that they have encountered. And some commanders have not been able to return to their homes, and they have been subject to continuous insult. And the verbal abuse also involve their parents. Is it that these protesters expect to occupy the road on a prolonged basis, or that they can insult the police in any way they want? If we want to fight for democracy, we should use the right method. It's not an excuse to occupy our roads. It's not a shoe that to use verbal abuse against other people. Such acts are undemocratic. They do not just damage our rule of law, and they have been using verbal violence against those who do not see eye to eye with them. Some members here have been subject to the verbal violence when we pass by their sites. I think democracy is about respecting other people's views. I hope that they will stop such violence. I will urge them to respect the police when they carry out the duty, and they should respect the police in discharging their lawful duties. Some people have accused the police of using excessive violence. The police have been showing the gear that they have been using. This time they do not wear any protective gear in the Mong Kok operation. And the police acted with a lot of restraint. They made it clear that they would not use pepper spray or batons if they are not charged. earlier, people had expressed doubts about the use of tear gas. I think the police have heard them because of the subsequent adjustment to their tactics and equipment. So the police has been active with restraint. They have been highly restrained and professional in doing their job. Presidents, the police have acted with such professionalism, and many people have stopped me and told me that they have seen what the police have done, and they support the police in doing their job professionally and in accordance with the law, and they asked me to say something to support the police force in front of the secretary here. Dozens of police officers have been injured in doing their job, and these people have asked me to convey our support and sympathy to these officers, and they also want the secretary to provide the necessary counseling and support, emotional support, because we have to be careful. We mustn't let the police officers becoming too tired and unsupported. I hope the secretary would tell us more about the support measures that the police have taken. The police are subject to a high level of scrutiny, both internally and also by the media. And every person, every protester on the scene would suit the incident, and I believe the police would always use the minimum force to complete that mission. As regards the accusations made by some members or some complaint cases being circulated on the internet, I hope the capital would deal with such cases impartially, and I believe by doing this, justice can be done to the police and also to the complainants. President, today the occupation movement trio have turned themselves in, and they've asked the protesters to leave. We have criticized the trio for starting something nasty and seem unable to finish with it. It seems that their surrender to the police would not mean the end of the movement. But however, I think I have to say that I see it as a positive act that they are now appealing to the protesters to leave. I think the Pan-Democrats and other supporters of the movement would understand that the continuation of the movement will not bring us democracy. If you ask the students to charge the police, it would just lead to unnecessary sacrifice and injuries. And I hope everyone would ask the protesters to leave now. The illegal occupation would harm our community, our economy. It's an act of self-inflicted injury, and it will certainly not take us forward in the development of democracy. If we have ideals and aspirations, we must also have a strategy. Self-inflicted injury, both physically and metaphorically, to our democracy will not do anyone good. I hope everyone will stop the self-inflicted injury. We should stop the movement right now.
Mr. To, we should all reflect on ourselves. Today, Hong Kong's situation has come to this position because of the government. The SARG and the CPG obstructed Hong Kong's path to democracy, and the CE hid behind the establishment. He received 400-odd pounds, but was not held liable. Why is it that Hong Kong's anger has accumulated to such an extent that it is now exploding? Starting from the 1950s, we got a lot of names for the police officers. Before and after 1997, we really called them policemen. And sometimes we even called them Dear Uncle Police. In recent years, once again, they're known as evil police, etc., etc. These labels indicate the ups and downs in Hong Kong people's impression about the police. Who created this conflict between the police and the people? In early September, we heard that the CPG would not like to have any bloodshed, but it won't compromise either. Mr. Leung Chi-wai said that nobody actually shed any blood. But no, from what we saw, a lot of people bled. We saw from TV screens and newspaper reports all these scenarios. Is it that we've turned a blind eye to these scenarios? If we want to stop this bleeding, we should not rely on escalating the acts of the police. The police officers are beating people up with their batons. We shouldn't have police officers battening people, creating such a shocking scenario. Otherwise, we'll be opening up a Pandora box. That started in Mong Kok, and Chi-wai Leung came out to smear the Mong Kok people. He said that the Mong Kok community is made up of different types of people. He, as the CE, shouldn't be dividing Hong Kong people like that. Be it Admiralty or Mong Kok, the people there are Hong Kong citizens. They're grassroots. That doesn't mean that their status are very complicated. In Mong Kok, we have MIT and graduates. In Admiralty, we have graduates from Oxford and Cambridge, journalists, people from the finance sector, as well as other sectors of the community, can be found both in Admiralty and Mong Kok. The CE should stop dividing us. Joseph Lian gave us a number of standards on the use of police batons. Number one, the baton should not be on people's head, only for hands and feet. Number two, when a police officer uses his baton, he shouldn't raise his arm higher than his shoulder. And use of batons is only acceptable when the safety of the police officer is undermined and the injured person should be sent to hospital. But this was not happening. We saw a lot of people bleeding, and injured people were chased after by police officers. 7 police officers got 1 person beaten up. Even journalists and medical personnel were beaten up. There's no resistance from the public. They only used eye masks, googles, or cling wrap, umbrellas to protect themselves. Still, they're beaten up. As the S4S said, umbrellas, are they weapons? And you've got eye masks and goggles, you've got cling wrap. That proves that you would like to resist the police. So this resulted in a vicious circle. Don't talk about foul language, mutual scolding, and so forth. The police force is a professional force. It should know how to manage its emotions. It shouldn't act like members of the public. Otherwise, members of the public will vent their emotions similarly. Police officers have guns, weapons, tear gas, batons, etc., etc. They also have the prison. So if police officers cannot contain their emotions and sentiments, it will be disastrous. So the police should be the first to restrain themselves. But now, it's the police force that first started to vent their emotions and sentiments. Then the public collapsed because we cannot trust the police anymore. When we have trouble, We won't fetch the police. We'll only fight one another. Police batons have also destroyed our confidence on the rule of law, as well as increasing the incentive to resist arrest. When police officers batoned people casually and randomly, and when we witness these violence or we personally experience such violence, the anger will be long-lasting. For a long, long time, the anger won't vanish. And this anger cannot be understood by the pro-establishment members here in this council who are used to using violence. Many members of the public have experienced this injustice this time. They hate and abhor police officers. They're lured to resist arrest, and this will be very damaging to Hong Kong. On the internet, some professional social workers said that they didn't know how to tell these young people. Some young people almost got their hand beaten off. They couldn't even convince themselves. It's the police force that started to escalate violence. We also have university lecturers in early October being beaten up without any reason by police officers. And recently, this university lecturer said that he had to reconsider whether or not peaceful demonstration is an effective way to strive for democracy. Well, you may use violence, but violence will not drive away the anger amongst the public. When people take to the street to combat police power, then things will go out of control. There will be difficulties in governance. Here we don't have curfew, but the situation is just like having a curfew. In Mong Kok, we have police officers patrolling, keeping a vigilant watch on the district. Then we'd better have police officers guarding everywhere. You see, even shoppers have to be guarded against. Why can't the police force take the lead to give up violence? Why can't the government respond to public aspirations for constitutional reform? Why can't there be dialogues between the public and the government? Why can't the government respond to the students so that we can properly resolve social conflicts? Police batons have exposed the dark side of Hong Kong. We can see that under the governance of Chi-wai, good people will become bad people, and bad people will become even poorer. What about this Lucifer effect? In 1971, in Stanford University, where Mrs. Regina Ip studied, there's this psychologist who conducted a psychology experiment. He fetched 24 students from famous universities, from the middle class, who have received higher education and are healthy. And before the experiment, they had to undergo a psychological test to prove that they are normal persons. Half of these university students had to pose as prisoners. Once they enter the prison, they had to be stripped, sterilized. They couldn't even wear underwear, and they had to wear a pantyhose mask. That's to insult them. That is, they're indignified. That is, to strip them of their dignity. The other half posed as prison guards to guard against these prisoners. On the sixth day, the prison guards thought that with no vigilance, they could bully these false prisoners who were awakened in the middle of the night, and they have they were made to perform very hard exercises. Eventually, 50 people joined the experiment. Only one person called it to a halt. Why? Because in this game, even Dr. Zimbardo, the conductor of the experiment, thought that he was the leader of the prison guards. He forgot that he's actually conducting an experiment only. And at the end, he asked the prison guards. A third of them said that they could not resist the temptation of power abuse. And the remaining prison guards dare not speak out. Just 6 days, Stanford University students coming from the middle class could be speedily contaminated by power. Well, I can't see how, under the rule of Chi-wai Leung and Mr. Zhang Wai-hong, we could have police officers shouldering the responsibility to beating up people can maintain their political mission. Because under your governance, even good people will become bad people. I agree that they should receive psychological counseling, because a healthy person will become a patient, a sick person under your rule. Well, later, when the students were interviewed and investigated, why is it that they so loved this game of bullying prisoners? Because life was so boring and power is corrupting. And you can see the dark side of human nature. In that circumstance, when a group of people can treat the other party inhumanely, just within 6 days, good people became bad people. Well, this time, we're facing a constitutional conflict. I understand that many members of the public find the Occupy Central movement caused them inconvenience. They could not have transport, etc., etc. Benny Tai yesterday explained, when there's a fire, somebody sounded an alarm asking people to escape and to extinguish the fire. There are these people who said that these people are crying too loudly, disturbing their sleep. That is a very good reflection of the present position of Hong Kong. But at the end of the day, we need to resolve the problem politically. Number one, we should spare Hong Kong people of systemic violence and police violence. But if Chi-wai Leung only relies on escalating police violence for governance, he'll only be planting more damages, because the situation will be even more long-lasting than the umbrella movement for 10 years, 20 years more. So if Chi-wai Leung only knows how to use these improper tactics, he will be the future sinner of Hong Kong.
President, I don't think there is enough quorum. I'm requesting a quorum call.
請議員肅靜。葉劉淑儀議員，請你發言。
多謝主席。
Mrs. Regina Ip. Thank you, President. On Monday, when we prepared for today's meeting, I talked to my party members that following the clearance in December by the police, there would be action taken by fellow councillors, and there would definitely be members who would be moving adjournment debate. We anticipated what was to come. The civic party put the police on the spot. They seem to be making it sound as if all the blame should be laid at the police, and they are really standing logic on his head. The Pan Democrats were smearing the police, and they were very biased since November the 25th, since the clearance operations. Now, I wasn't there myself, and I don't think we can come to any judgment from what we saw on TV. I noticed yesterday the editorial in the Ming-Pao Daily. I get the feeling that the reporter who wrote the editorial wrote on the basis of what he saw on the scene. I don't normally agree with the Ming-Pao Daily, but this one I think is really impartial. It's worth quoting. Yesterday morning, the protesters waged a battle with the police from Long Wall Road all the way to the Tamar Park and all the way to the Admiralty MTR station. In the process, the police used a level of force higher than before. There are some protesters who were pepper sprayed and batoned on their retreat, and the police used excessive force. But it takes two to tango. The students suggested encircling the Tamar, and it is rare to see such force used by the police, and this is the result of the interaction between the parties. The movement is led by the radicals, and the next scene is going to be even more radical and more bloody. It is not beyond the realm of possibility. The statement or the issued by the Pan Democrats really condemned the police for using excessive force, and they were silent. The statement was silent on the radical behavior of the students. Would that condone the acts of the students? The Democrats don't have the moral courage to make a distinction between right and wrong. Now, this is from the Ming-Pao Daily. These are not my words. I'm sure that the reporters saw what happened on the scene. A lot of Pan Democrat members accused the police of using foul language, of beating the protesters. Now, there are so many who demonized the police. They were labeled as dogs and were labeled as rogue policemen. All these abusive language was really very unpleasant. And they engaged in cyberbullying. They tried to dredge up all the particulars of the policeman. I meant to submit an urgent question, but I didn't want to make life difficult for you. I think it is ridiculous. The members are attaching so much importance to privacy. Do you remember a couple of years ago, the Octopus company sold the personal information to the promoters, and we tried to invoke the PNP to conduct investigation. Personal privacy is so important. Do you remember there is a golden web, a golden group that tried to uncover, try to disclose the particulars of the policeman. Now, this is the group that is trying to disclose the policemen's numbers, personal particulars, telephone numbers, addresses, discussion numbers, discussion, question, discussion, answers, and they are coaching how they can get hold of the personal particulars. The first thing is to get the number, police ID number, and then they get hold of all the email address, and they use the open source to search the mobile numbers, and they try to dredge up all the personal information of the policemen, and all the friends and relatives and family members were also uncovered, and all they tried to get hold of all these information and post it to the discussion forum. They tried to get hold of the negative comments. Some even went so far as to urge or to say that the police or the policemen are worried about their personal particulars being disclosed. Now, Superintendent Chu in Shatin was subject to this kind of treatment also. Is this kind of act unlawful? I think there is some legitimate reason to put an urgent question or to put an adjournment debate to curb this kind of behavior. I've asked the Privacy Commissioner to follow up. Under the law, I'm not the victim myself. I cannot lodge a complaint, but I can raise this with the Privacy Commissioner to see what action can be taken to follow up. Why is it that people don't talk about this? Verbally abusing the police? Now, they have the arsenal. They have the homemade shields. They have the hard hats. All these rioters, they're wearing hard hats and moving forward on command. Why is it that nobody is condemning them? This kind of act. The police are human beings. They've been subject to abuse over the past few weeks, and I think we have to be fair to them. President, I'd like to make this other point that in Mong Kok or in Admiralty on Sunday, the police are resorted to more force, but that represented the minimum level of force. There is a need for more force because the Occupy movement has been dragging on for too long. The way it has been dragging on means that the police have to deploy manpower from other units to maintain law and order. Now, there was an expatriate who wrote to the SMP to lodge a complaint. She said that her house was burgled. She reported to the police station in the Arsenal Street, where there was the report room was full of people, and a frustrated officer told her that the police manpower has been deployed, and minor cases will have to wait. I mean, if this goes on like this, the law and order will go in Hong Kong. So I think it is only right for the police to take deterrent action to warn the troublemakers that they would not be able to get their way with violence. If you understand the policing constabulary work, what the policemen are merely beating people on their arms, on the limbs. The protesters are kitted out with helmets. Dr. Lo Wing Lok said that in his column that people are accusing the police of using tear gas. Have we seen any heavy casualties at the A&E department? There were so many policemen who were wounded. Why is nobody telling the protesters not to do so? Now, I had to attend a banquet, or have to attend a banquet, and I heard so many biased arguments, and I can't help really speaking up, and I hope that the pro-establishment members would speak up against all these biased and bigoted remarks that are standing logic on his head. Now we heard from the Pan Democrats that the responsibility lies with the SAR government and the central authorities. I have to point out that Benny Tai started talking about civil disobedience. He did so in January 2013, and he said that civil disobedience is the most lethal weapon. It was about 2 years ago, even before the consultation on the chief executive election, that Benny Tai started talking about this lethal weapon of civil disobedience, and they're trying to bring pressure to bear on the Hong Kong government and the central authorities, who should be held responsible for that. In July this year, during the rally, what sort of slogans did we see? That was at the time before the NPCSC took the decision. And they talked about a showdown with the government. They talked about laying siege to the CGO and try to bring pressure on to bear on the government. I think we have to understand the causes of this.
Mr. Chan Kim-po, thank you, President. I regret to say that the movement is based on a mentality of kidnap and also of misleading the young people. This is against the law. Whether there are injunction orders, the police have all the power to clear out the sites. But since there are so many protesters, clearance operation will create a lot of problems. Therefore, the police have been tolerant in the past months. Now that we have injunction orders issued by the court, saying that whether the protesters think that they are on moral high grounds or not, and if they do not comply with injunction orders, this is against the rule of law. The protesters have been misled into believing that civil obedience is against the law, but it's not wrong. But actually, these acts are not as morally sound as they think. Something that the police, in assisting the carrying out of the injunction orders, should not do something else. Actually, this is misleading. Actually, the police have the power to clear out the sites. Whenever they do it, it's always lawful. And now the injunction orders are only there to tell those people who think that they have not committed any wrong, that they are acting against the law. The police have been issuing warnings after and again and urge the protesters to disperse peacefully. If members of this council say that there were no police warnings, no one would believe that. The police try to use mild tactics to disperse the protesters, but that was not successful, and they only invite more conflicts. The protesters wear all sorts of protective gears, helmets, and so on and so forth. So the police must resort to a suitable level of force without any choice in order to be effective. The police are reactive. If the protesters do not ram against the police positions, there will be no need for the use force. And if the protesters use a more violent means, the police have no choice but to use a higher level of force. So if you just accuse the police of using excessive force, this is not actually facing up to the truth, and it's not a solution. The movement have harmed the livelihood of our people and businesses in the district. I hope the protesters should stop doing this. I think those people who are most affected are not the occupation trio or the leaders of scholarism and Hong Kong Federation of Students, because they are well protected and well provided for. They would get favorable treatment and assistance. But those young students who have been misled will suffer most. They think that they are just doing something against the law, but they have not done anything wrong. They think that it's just like playing a video game, but actually assaulting a police officer can lead to imprisonment terms. According to the Cap 2, Section 17, causing injury with intent can lead to life imprisonment. Many members from the opposition camp have referred to many outrageous rumors on the internet, but people are smart enough to know that most of them are not true. Actually, the violence, protests, and the attempt to barge into this council was based on the so-called Internet Article 23, the legislation. Some members have referred to other violent groups, but these violent groups have all been gone into oblivion, and their members suffered a lot. It's a kind of psychotropic drugs to think that by escalating the violence you can get democracy. I hope parents who have heard me should tell their young people the truth. We should try to save every one of them. If you have a criminal record, your life ahead is going to be very difficult. If you do not save them, you will regret forever. I shall submit. I will adjourn the meeting until 9 a.m.